We all remember the thrill of a great action scene, the thunder of gunfire, the shockwave of an explosion, the kind of chaos that makes the heart race, even when we know it's all just choreography and controlled danger. Hollywood has spent decades perfecting the illusion of violence, building entire industries around fake bullets, rubber prop weapons, and carefully designed pyrotechnics, meant to look deadly, but never truly threaten anyone on set. At least that's what we're told. But peel back the velvet curtain, and another story emerges, one far more unsettling than the polished spectacle on screen. Because for years, long before safety coordinators became mandatory and stunt regulations tightened, realism wasn't a goal. It was an obsession. Directors demanded authenticity. Producers pushed boundaries. And actors, many of them desperate to prove something to themselves or to the industry, agreed to risks that today would shut down a production instantly. And that's how we ended up with an era in which the gunfire in certain scenes wasn't simulated at all. The bullets were real. The explosions didn't always have controlled blast radiuses. The flames weren't digitally enhanced. The metal shrapnel that ripped across the frame came from actual detonations, not special effects rigs. On some sets, the danger wasn't an illusion. It was the air everyone breathed. Some actors walked away shaken, some were injured, and some never walked away again. Hollywood remembers these moments quietly, almost reluctantly stored in the shadows of production history, referenced only in whispers, if at all. Because what happened on those sets wasn't supposed to happen. And the truth behind the footage raises a chilling question. When does the pursuit of cinematic realism cross the line into real-life recklessness? Tonight, we're stepping into the stories the studios hoped would fade away. Let's dive into 15 Hollywood action movies that used real ammunition, real explosives, and real danger, often with consequences no one saw coming. Fact, Hash 1, The Expendables 3. Imagine filming an action sequence so dangerous that even the stunt crew stepped back, yet the actor at the center of it refused to. That was the atmosphere on the set of The Expendables 3, where the production's obsession with practical effects nearly cost Jason Statham his life. The film, known for bringing together some of the biggest action names in Hollywood, wanted to strip away the CGI gloss and recreate the visceral energy of the 80s. But what the crew got instead was a moment no one could control. During a high-speed chase along the Varna coastline, Statham was driving a modified 3-ton military truck meant to plunge into the water on cue. The stunt was rehearsed, the timing was checked, and the vehicle was supposedly secured. What the team didn't know was that the brakes had failed. Not slipped, not weakened, failed completely. As cameras rolled, Statham hit the pedal and felt nothing but dead weight beneath his foot. The truck tore past its mark, veering toward the edge of the dock. The crew watched in real time, too far away to intervene, as Statham disappeared inside the sinking vehicle. There were no divers in position, no safety nets, no chance to reset. It was not a stunt anymore. It was a man trapped in a steel coffin, plummeting into open water. What saved him was something no director could have planned: years of competitive diving from his pre-acting career. He slipped out of the cabin, swam out of the submerged truck, and surfaced shaken but alive. Ironically, the scene they'd risked everything for was never used in its original form. Hollywood labeled the incident a close call, but within the crew, it was remembered as something else entirely, the day realism almost took its first expendable. But as dangerous as this moment was, it wasn't the only time a production went too far. Fact, Hash 2, Rambo 3. Before digital effects and green screens softened the edges of movie warfare, Rambo 3 was produced in an era when explosive spectacle was built, with real fire, real debris, and occasionally real ammunition. The film positioned itself as a high-octane continuation of the franchise, but behind the camera, there was something closer to organized chaos. The crew shot in Israel and Thailand under scorching heat, limited infrastructure, and a production mentality that preferred authenticity over safety protocols. One of the most unsettling truths came years later. several sequences involving heavy gunfire were reportedly filmed using live rounds. Not blanks, not custom cartridges, actual ammunition. Extra authenticity, they called it. But for the actors and crew standing within range, it was a gamble with consequences far beyond the script. At one point, a helicopter assault scene required dozens of fighters to charge through a field while explosives detonated around them. The blasts weren't precisely timed or electronically controlled. Many were manually triggered by pyrotechnicians relying on visual cues. Stallone himself later hinted at the risks, saying that during certain takes, the ground shook with a force you only get from real artillery. Crew members recalled shrapnel landing frighteningly close, and at least one stunt performer was knocked off his feet by a shockwave that traveled farther than expected. The production moved fast, often too fast, because daylight was limited, and the budget was tighter than the film's scale suggested. The irony. Despite all the danger, many of the most explosive shots were trimmed in editing for pacing. What remained on screen was only a fraction of the real firepower unleashed during shooting a sanitized echo of a set that felt at times like a war zone. And yet, even that pales in comparison to what happened on a 1969 classic. Fact Hash 3, The Wild Bunch, 1969. Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch is often remembered as a landmark of cinematic violence, a film that pushed boundaries and reshaped how Hollywood portrayed brutality on screen. But what audiences didn't know was that the danger behind the scenes was every bit as real as the carnage in the story. Peckinpah was obsessed with authenticity, and in 1969 that obsession collided with a production culture that lacked clear safety protocols. To achieve the visceral realism he wanted, Peckinpah instructed armorers to use live ammunition during some wide shots, particularly those involving volleys of gunfire hitting distant targets. Blank rounds, he argued, lacked the force and impact he craved. So real bullets were fired especially in scenes where actors were not directly in line with fire, but still within the broader environment of the shot. This created a set where the margin for error was thin enough to feel like a dare. The climactic shootout, which used thousands of rounds, became a logistical nightmare. Extras were positioned around exploding squibs, and several of the pyrotechnic charges misfired due to dust storms that swept through the set. One camera operator reportedly dove behind equipment when a live round struck a metal prop nearby, sending ricochets across the courtyard. Peckinpah refused to slow down, insisting that the chaos only enhanced the realism. Some actors later admitted they felt more like soldiers than performers navigating a battlefield ruled by unpredictable blasts. And a director who believed great cinema required genuine danger. The studio tried to bury the details once the film became a classic, framing the production as ambitious rather than reckless. But the truth is simpler and far more unsettling, for moments at a time. The Wild Bunch wasn't a movie, it was Crossfire. Fact Hash 4, Full Metal Jacket. Stanley Kubrick was not a director known for compromise. On the set of Full Metal Jacket, his pursuit of control bordered on legendary. But the irony is that one of the film's most dangerous elements came from a decision that loosened that very control. The production built its own version of war-torn Hugh City in an abandoned gasworks facility outside London, a maze of concrete corridors and tight interiors that amplified every sound. When the pyrotechnic team proposed using mild explosive charges to simulate battlefield concussion, Kubrick approved, then pushed for more intensity. The problem wasn't the explosions themselves, but where they were placed inside confined spaces with cast and crew only feet away. During the sniper sequence, the blasts were designed to mimic the terrifying snap of incoming rounds. The charges were real, and their shockwaves ricocheted off the walls with brutal clarity. Actors described feeling the percussion in their bones before they even heard the sound. One incident involved a blast triggering slightly off timing, sending debris across the set far closer than intended. A camera operator was struck in the arm by a shard of metal, and for the rest of the shoot, Kubrick insisted on revising the blast patterns, but never reducing their intensity. Matthew Modine later recalled that many of the scenes people assumed were CGI enhanced were just us in real smoke with real fire taking real hits, just not from bullets. The psychological toll was just as real. Kubrick demanded dozens of takes for sequences involving gunfire and explosions, pushing actors through repeated rounds of sensory assault. The realism the film achieved came at the cost of quiet dread, on-set attention no one spoke about openly until years later. But the pursuit of authenticity didn't end there. Another production, this one a war film built on large-scale operations, would push its cast into a different kind of chaos altogether. Fact, #5 Black Hawk Down. Ridley Scott's Black Hawk Down was conceived as a relentless depiction of modern warfare, and the production embraced that philosophy long before cameras started rolling. The crew arrived in Morocco to find the landscape already dotted with military hardware imported specifically for the film. Real Humvees, functional helicopters, and crates of pyrotechnics large enough to arm a small battalion. Scott didn't want staged violence. He wanted kinetic authenticity, the kind that could only be created with real machinery and real detonations. What many viewers don't realize is that the film's signature sequences, streets erupting and flame debris raining from the sky, were created with practical explosions, powerful enough to rattle buildings outside the set perimeter. The Moroccan military assisting in the production provided trained soldiers as extras, and some of the gunfights used blank-adapted weapons capable of cycling at full combat rate. In at least one prolonged shootout, the volume and heat of gunfire caused a technical operator to suffer temporary hearing loss. During a helicopter pass over the main market square, the downdraft combined with pyrotechnic smoke to create near-zero visibility. One stunt performer running through the haze collided with scaffolding that hadn't been cleared, resulting in fractured ribs and a production pause. Scott insisted the shot was worth it. War isn't clean, he reportedly said, and resumed filming with even larger blast rigs to shake the ground for the next sequence. What emerged from the chaos was a film that felt brutally real because in many ways it was. The cast described the set not as a simulation, but as a war zone with cameras. And yet, as dangerous as these moments were, Hollywood still had a story where even a skyscraper became an unpredictable battlefield. Fact #6, Die Hard. When Die Hard exploded onto screens in 1988, audiences were captivated by the visceral energy of its action. What they didn't know was how much of that energy came from danger that wasn't simulated at all. The production shot extensively inside Fox Plaza in Los Angeles, an active operational office building, and the decision to use real pyrotechnics in its confined spaces created a series of problems the safety team could only partially control. Bruce Willis entered the film as a rising star, but he left its set with permanent hearing damage after a close-range rifle blast during a hallway shootout. The weapon used blanks, but the concussion within narrow walls produced a pressure wave strong enough to rupture part of his eardrum. The crew quickly learned that filming explosive sequences indoors amplified the power of every detonation, every ricochet effect, every spark. The iconic sequence of John McClane running barefoot across shattered glass came from a practical setup using real safety glass mixed with sugar glass, far safer than traditional breakaways, but still sharp enough to cut unprotected skin. Willis insisted on filming several takes himself, resulting in multiple lacerations and a production rumor that circulated for years the actor wasn't acting in pain. He was trying not to bleed through makeup. Even the Nakatomi rooftop sequence carried its own hazards. When the production triggered a large explosion to simulate the helicopter crash, the shockwave traveled farther than calculated and blew out several real office windows on lower floors. Security teams evacuated staff from adjacent levels after the blast set off alarms throughout the building. But if Die Hard flirted with disaster, the next film on our list crossed a line Hollywood could never take back. Fact #7, The Crow. There are movie accidents, and then there is the tragedy that forever changed Hollywood's relationship with on-set weapon safety. The Crow was never meant to be a dangerous production. It was a stylized action fantasy film, with gothic visuals, modest firefights, and a rising star, Brandon Lee, whose physical commitment allowed the movie to lean on practical stunts rather than elaborate effects. But one failure inside the weapon department turned a routine scene into a fatal rupture between fiction and reality. The night of March 31st, 1993, the cast prepared to shoot a sequence in which Lee's character is shot by thugs upon entering his apartment. The handgun used in the scene had previously been loaded with dummy rounds for close-up shots. What the crew didn't realize was that during a prior take, the tip of one dummy round had lodged inside the barrel. When the weapon was reloaded with blanks cartridges powerful enough to propel anything caught in the barrel, the stage was set for catastrophe. When Lee stepped into position, he wasn't facing danger written into the script. He was facing a real projectile fired at lethal velocity. The impact sent him collapsing instantly, crew members assuming he was acting until he didn't get up. Rushed into surgery, he never regained consciousness. Hollywood labeled it an accident, but nothing about it felt accidental. Miscommunication, rushed prop prep, budget limitations, and complacency formed a chain that ended a life. The irony is that the shot itself, the reason the gun was loaded, never appeared in the final cut. In the years that followed, the tragedy shaped new safety protocols across the industry. Yet, even stricter rules couldn't stop another production from using explosives that pushed its actors into genuine battlefield terror. Fact #8, The Hurt Locker. Before it won 6 Oscars, The Hurt Locker was a film defined by its brutal realism, so brutal that many cast members later admitted they weren't sure where the acting stopped and survival instinct began. Director Catherine Bigelow rejected the controlled aesthetics of studio war dramas. She wanted the heat, the grit, the claustrophobia of real bomb disposal. And that meant shooting with practical explosives powerful enough to rattle the camera crew even from behind cover. The production set up in Jordan close enough to the Iraqi border that the sound of live gunfire occasionally drifted across the desert. Bigelow used this tension deliberately, integrating it into the film's atmosphere. When a bomb detonates in the Hurt Locker, it isn't a digital shockwave, it's a physical burst of sand, metal, and pressure that actors actually experienced. Jeremy Renner was knocked backward during a blast that exceeded its planned radius, bruising several ribs and temporarily stunning his hearing. The crew didn't reset the shot. They kept rolling. One particularly dangerous moment occurred during the car bomb sequence. The explosive rig attached beneath the vehicle misfired on its first cue, then detonated inconsistently on the second, sending debris flying toward lighting equipment that only narrowly missed hitting a focus puller. Production halted for inspection, but Bigelow insisted the real danger in the explosion captured the panic she needed. Renner later said he felt the real terror of being too close to a bomb, and that the authenticity came at a cost no one predicted. The film's grit wasn't an illusion. It was the residue of real shockwaves, real risk, real unpredictability. But if The Hurt Locker used explosives to chase immersion, the next film pushed even further, turning one of the most revered war movies ever made into an ordeal its cast never forgot. Fact #9, Saving Private Ryan. Steven Spielberg wanted the opening of Saving Private Ryan to feel like history itself was bleeding into the screen. To achieve that, he orchestrated one of the most physically demanding sequences ever filmed, the Omaha beach landing. But what many viewers don't know is how close the production came to crossing a line between depiction and reenactment, as the scale and force of the practical effects pushed actors into genuine panic. The beach set in Ireland was rigged with dozens of buried explosive charges. Real pyrotechnics designed to mimic artillery hitting sand. Each detonation fired metal plates upward to simulate bullet impacts, while water cannons launched plumes resembling incoming mortar shells. Timing was everything, yet even with meticulous planning, unpredictability became part of the shoot. Several actors described moments where debris struck them hard enough to leave bruises, One stunt performer was knocked off his feet when a blast erupted slightly ahead of its cue. The chaos on screen, the trembling hands, the disoriented shouting wasn't method acting. It was the shock of being in the middle of practical explosions detonating closer than anyone expected. The production also used real seawater pumped at high pressure to simulate machine gun spray. The force knocked down extras repeatedly, and one crew member later admitted that a few takes bordered on unsafe, but were kept because the visceral realism was too extraordinary to recreate. Spielberg refused to mute the violence. He wanted viewers to feel disoriented, overwhelmed, frightened, just as the actors had. Many veterans of the shoot later said the experience left them shaken days afterward. And yet, even this monumental chaos pales beside the next film, one whose pursuit of spectacle placed a real helicopter, a real explosion, and real lives on the line. Fact #10, Terminator 2 Judgment Day. James Cameron has always been drawn to the edge of danger, but Terminator 2 pushed even his appetite for risk into territory that left the cast and crew holding their breath. The film's most dangerous sequence, the nighttime helicopter pursuit through a narrow industrial corridor, wasn't a mix of models or optical tricks. It was a real police helicopter flying at dangerously low altitude, piloted under a bridge that was never meant for aircraft clearance. The pilot, Chuck Tamburo, was a veteran with nerves of steel, but even he hesitated when Cameron insisted the helicopter needed to fly so low that its skids nearly scraped the ground. At one point, alarmed crew members tried to intervene, insisting that the maneuver violated standard aviation safety guidelines. Cameron's response became infamous. If Tamburo wouldn't do it, he would find someone who would. Tamburo complied, and what followed was one of the most harrowing real stunts ever captured on film. The aircraft barreled through the corridor at high-speed pyrotechnic explosions, erupting on both sides. The shockwaves buffeted the helicopter harder than expected, tilting its frame and sending several crew members diving for cover behind equipment. If the angle had shifted by even a few degrees, the blades would have struck the bridge supports, killing everyone involved. The sequence made it to the final cut, almost untouched, its intensity genuine, because the danger was real. Cameron later admitted in interviews that if he attempted that shot today, insurance companies would shut him down instantly. But as risky as airborne stunts were, Hollywood would soon face a different kind of danger on the streets of Los Angeles. Fact #11. Heat, 1995. Michael Mann didn't just want Heat to look real. He wanted authenticity embedded into every frame. For the film's iconic downtown shootout, he demanded that actors fire their weapons exactly as they would in an actual gun battle. That meant using full-power blanks, producing muzzle blasts and shockwaves potent enough to rattle nearby windows. The sound echoing through the streets was so loud that it bled into surrounding neighborhoods, prompting real 911 calls from residents who believed a firefight had erupted outside their homes. But it wasn't just noise that made the sequence dangerous. The actors, including Robert De Niro and Val Kilmer, trained with former Special Forces personnel to move, reload, and fire under pressure. During filming, the tactical choreography called for Kilmer to pivot and unleash a burst toward a squad car. The muzzle blast sent hot debris scattering across the pavement, one fragment striking a crew member's pant leg and burning through the fabric before extinguishing itself. The heat from the volleys also caused several car props to ignite unexpectedly. One vehicle caught fire before its scheduled explosion, forcing the stunt team to intervene while the cameras were still rolling. Mann refused to stage the sequence indoors or use sound stages. He wanted the acoustics of real buildings, real asphalt, real echo chambers. It worked. The shootout became one of cinema's most studied action scenes, not because of stylization, but because it felt terrifyingly plausible. The cast later admitted that adrenaline on set was indistinguishable from real panic. And yet, even Heat's urban warfare couldn't match the sheer unpredictability of the next production, a film where violence wasn't just recreated, but occasionally escaped its boundaries. Fact #12, Roar, 1989. Glory is remembered for its emotional power and historical weight, but behind the scenes, its battle sequences were far more chaotic than the controlled artistry audiences witnessed. The filmmakers sought a level of realism that required hundreds of extras, dozens of horses, and banks of pyrotechnics designed to mimic the sensory overload of Civil War combat. What they underestimated was how 19th century warfare recreated with 20th century explosives could produce moments no one could fully prepare for. During the climactic assault on Fort Wagner, the battlefield set was rigged with explosive charges buried in sand berms. These charges, meant to send dirt spraying upward like artillery impact, were triggered manually by pyrotechnicians watching the movement of actors. Timing errors became almost inevitable. In one instance, a blast detonated seconds early, just as a group of extras advanced, sending a surge of sand and wood fragments across their ranks. 2 performers suffered minor concussions and were removed from the day's shoot. Horses pose their own unpredictable dangers. Sensitive to loud concussions, several animals panicked during the take bucking and colliding with nearby stuntmen. One rider was thrown and narrowly avoided being trampled when a second horse bolted sideways, destabilized by a detonator charge that erupted closer than planned. Despite these incidents, the director pushed forward, believing the raw chaos brought a sense of authenticity no amount of choreography could match. And in a way, he was right. The trembling hands, the frantic motions, the gasps for breath on screen weren't rehearsed. They were reactions to real shockwaves rolling across the set. But all of this was only a prelude to the most notoriously dangerous shoot in Hollywood history. Fact, #13, RoboCop 1987. Few films wear their violence as boldly as RoboCop, but the brutality on screen was matched, sometimes exceeded by the risks behind it. Paul Verhoeven wanted the film's gunfights to feel sharp, overwhelming, almost mechanical in their intensity. To achieve that, he insisted on using full-power blank-firing weapons in enclosed industrial locations where every shot turned into a deafening concussion. No one anticipated how quickly the chaos of these effects would escalate. The most dangerous moment occurred during the infamous ED-209 malfunction sequence. Dozens of squibs were mounted on the actor playing the executive, who becomes the robot's unintended target. Verhoeven demanded an escalating crescendo of blasts, far more than what the effects team felt comfortable with. As the cameras rolled, the squibs fired in rapid succession, peppering the room with fragments of plaster and burning debris. A few charges detonated slightly off-mark, sending sparks toward equipment and forcing nearby crew members to shield their eyes. Meanwhile, Peter Weller, trapped in the stifling RoboCop suit made of fiberglass and foam, often had limited visibility and mobility. During one warehouse gunfight, he failed to see a blast marker on the ground. When a charge detonated beside him, the force nearly knocked him off balance, sending him staggering dangerously close to jagged metal set pieces. The suit saved him from lacerations, but not from bruising. Verhoeven's relentless pace meant scenes were reset quickly, sometimes too quickly. Several crew members later admitted they felt the production walked a thin line between controlled mayhem and real danger. But if RoboCop felt like industrial warfare, the next film transformed the entire landscape into a battlefield. Fact, #14 Apocalypse Now. Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now has become synonymous with cinematic madness, and for good reason. The production wasn't merely difficult. It was a descent into volatility, where weather, weaponry, and ambition collided in ways no safety coordinator could fully control. The Philippine jungle provided a haunting backdrop, but it also introduced a level of unpredictability that turned every large-scale sequence into a gamble. The most dangerous events centered on the filming of the helicopter attack, accompanied by Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. The aircraft used in the scene weren't props, they were actual military helicopters on loan from the Philippine Air Force, piloted by soldiers who were simultaneously involved in active conflict elsewhere. In the middle of shooting, several helicopters were abruptly recalled to fight insurgents, leaving the formation unexpectedly thin. Coppola kept cameras rolling anyway, adjusting choreography on the fly. The pyrotechnics team had rigged the tree line with massive charges meant to simulate napalm strikes. But tropical winds shifted without warning, causing fireballs to tilt sideways as they erupted. In one take, a blast pushed a wave of heat so close to the flight path that a helicopter visibly wavered on camera, its pilot later admitting he nearly pulled out of the sequence entirely. The set descended further into instability when a typhoon swept through the region, destroying sets and saturating explosive rigs, making their behavior less predictable. Instead of halting production indefinitely, Coppola rebuilt and pushed ahead, chasing the chaos that would eventually define the film's legacy. But as destructive as Apocalypse Now was, the final film on our list brought danger down to a terrifyingly intimate scale. Fact, #15, Platoon, 1986. Oliver Stone's Platoon carries the unmistakable weight of lived experience. Stone had served in Vietnam, and he demanded that the film reflect the emotional and physical intensity he remembered. That meant rejecting studio backlots and opting for dense Philippine jungles close enough in climate and terrain to trigger déjà vu. But the pursuit of authenticity introduced a level of danger that crept into nearly every sequence. To prepare the cast, Stone subjected them to a real boot camp in the jungle overseen by military advisors who treated the actors like recruits rather than performers. Sleep deprivation, constant humidity, and physical exhaustion shaped their performances, but also lowered their alertness once shooting began. The production used explosive squibs with higher-than-standard charges, ensuring that dirt and foliage erupted with violent force. During one ambush scene, a blast detonated with more power than intended, sending a piece of tree bark slicing through a stunt performer's gear. Another charge erupted beneath soil that had eroded overnight, throwing debris farther than calculated and narrowly missing Charlie Sheen during a forward crawl. The firefight sequences were choreographed tightly, but in the dense undergrowth, visibility was limited. Actors occasionally lost track of their marks, drifting close to practical explosion zones. The result was a series of near misses no one realized were dangerous until playback revealed how close they had come. Stone later said the jungle gave the film its realism, but cast members privately admitted it also gave them genuine fear. The shaking breaths, the wide-eyed confusion, the adrenaline saturating their movements, it wasn't only performance. It was survival instinct. And with Platoon, Hollywood's long flirtation with real danger reached a moment of reckoning. Bonus fact, The Last Hunter, 1980. Some productions flirt with danger. Others step directly into it. The Last Hunter, an Italian-produced Vietnam War action film shot in the Philippines in 1980, belonged to the second category, a movie whose behind-the-scenes reality was so reckless that even seasoned stuntmen later refused to speak about it. The director, Antonio Margheriti, wanted explosions big enough to rival studio films, but lacked the budget infrastructure and oversight that Hollywood relied on. What he did have was access to abandoned military ordnance, scattered throughout the countryside. The production hired local demolitions experts, not trained pyrotechnicians, to rig charges for battlefield scenes. Many of these experts were actually former soldiers, repurposing leftover munitions from real conflict zones. During the filming of a river ambush sequence, one explosive buried in the mud detonated with far greater force than anyone expected. The blast sent a shockwave across the water, flipping a boat carrying 3 stunt performers. All survived, but 2 suffered ruptured eardrums and burns that forced them off the shoot for weeks. Another moment came when a hillside rigged with makeshift mortars misfired, sending a plume of debris straight toward the camera team. A lens shattered, and a lighting operator was struck by a splinter of wood embedded deep enough to require medical evacuation. The footage, astonishingly, was used in the final cut, its chaos too authentic to replicate safely. The irony is that The Last Hunter never reached mainstream audiences. Distribution was limited, and the film quietly slipped into obscurity. What remained was not its box office footprint, but whispers from its crew that no fictional war they'd ever filmed came as close to real danger as this forgotten one. Cinema has always walked a thin line between illusion and reality. But these stories reveal just how easily that line can vanish when ambition outruns caution. Some of the moments you've just heard were crafted for spectacle. Others unfolded because no one realized danger had already slipped onto the set. And now that you've seen how close Hollywood has come to disaster, the question shifts to you. Which of these behind-the-scenes moments struck you as the most reckless or the most unforgettable? Do you think authenticity is worth the risk, or should these extremes never be repeated?